back. You are watching and listening to Breakfast with Martin and Ellie.
Yeah, and let's go straight to the papers now. We've got Emma Wolfe and Kevin Schofield. Loads going on today. Who are we going to start with, Els?
Let's start with Emma. Have you not got a list?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so Emma, we'll look at the Telegraph, shall we? And this is on the front page, that ministers had a secret unit to curb critics of lockdown.
Yes.
Tell us a bit more about this.
Well, I think this won't come as a surprise to a lot of people who are active on social media and things, but it did come as a surprise. I think it'll come as a surprise to a lot of the public. It's kind of quite a chilling, quite a sinister story on the face of it. The front page of the Telegraph is saying that there's this counter-disinformation unit, which does sound like something out of the Chinese Communist Party, which was set up during the pandemic to tackle supposed domestic threats and was used to target people who were critical of lockdown and people who were sort of tweeting and who were questioning things like vaccine passports, the mass vaccination of children, things like that, things that I think a lot of us had our eyebrows slightly raised about. And they would either suppress or delete social media posts of these people sort of academics, doctors, high-profile people on social media who were, there's an Oxford epidemiologist, Professor Carl Hennigan, who has advised Boris Johnson, people like that. Their activities, their social media posts were being monitored during the pandemic.
And I wonder, Kevin, if this feeds into that sort of feeling of, this conspiracy theory stuff that was going around. Actually, a lot of those people, history has proven, were challenging things democratically and correctly.
Yeah.
There was people at the time saying, my tweets are being suppressed, people are attacking me, am I just mad or just paranoid? But now it's true, it's a government unit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fine line to be walked here, I think. If it is about genuine misinformation, people spreading lies, propaganda on social media, I think that is important, that the government does keep an eye on that. However, if it then strays into cracking down on people who are basically just criticising government policy, then that is pretty sinister. We do live in a democracy, a free society where you are allowed to challenge what the government is saying. But if it's been done in such a way, as long as you've got evidence to back it up, if it's been done to, as I say, suppress criticism of the government, then that is pretty chilling, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the CDU, it does, as you say, Kevin, it does definitely look at misinformation, really willful, kind of unhelpful things. The vaccine kills black people, the vaccine is, makes you infertile, that kind of stuff. That kind of really, damaging misinformation. But the fact is, people who are asking valid questions, which have now been proved to be well-founded, were having their social media posts repressed and were having their activities monitored.
And this is the result of an investigation by the Telegraph.
Yeah.
This is exclusive by them. Really, really.
There's so much more to come out about the whole lockdown. And I don't think it's going to come out in this 20-year, probably, inquiry that's going to...
I was just going to say, it does feed into the WhatsApp story at the moment, doesn't it, with Boris Johnson, the Cabinet Office, and that public inquiry, because these conversations could very well have been had over WhatsApp as well, what to do with these sorts of conversations and social media.
Well, yeah, and as Emma suggested, it is going to go on. This public inquiry is going to go on for a long, long time, and I think by the time it's published, the pandemic will be a distant memory, hopefully.
2026, isn't it?
Well, that's when the public evidence sessions are expected to finish. But, it could be years after that before the actual report is published, so it'll be a long time, I think.
Speaking as somebody who was very active during lockdowns, and I was just saying, well, let's see the evidence on things like masks, particularly on things like vaccinating children, on compulsory vaccine mandates for NHS care workers. 100,000 people were going to get sacked at one point by Saveed Javid. This just seemed to me, well, hang on a minute, let's see the evidence. It just felt wrong to be sacking people during
many doctors asking, and professors and scientists asking for the evidence before we went rushing down these routes of mass vaccination of children and things like that.
And if we're now seeing that the government was kind of pushing back against it, I think it's an incredibly interesting story. It feels slightly Orwellian.
Does feel now.
That's where we are. Okay, shall we move on?
Yes, Kevin, let's look at the Mail, shall we? And this is sports fans face rail chaos today.
Well, yeah, I know you were discussing it earlier, a huge day of sport, a mass movement of people from Manchester down to London to see the FA Cup final, but they're going to find it very difficult. We saw the supporters earlier on, having to get coaches instead of trains because of these strikes which have clearly been timed to cause maximum disruption, which is the whole point of strike action, to use leverage to try and bring about an end to the dispute. However, it doesn't look as though that's going to happen anytime soon. There's a senior rail sources quoted in this story saying that it could go on certainly for the rest of the year, and we're already approaching the first anniversary of the first rail strikes, incredibly, and there doesn't seem to be any resolution in sight. Both sides seem to have been completely dug in and no room for compromise. And I think at the moment, I think at the beginning of the industrial action, I think there probably was a lot of public sympathy for rail workers. The longer it's gone on, I just wonder whether that is starting to shift now, and people are losing sympathy.
Do people just get used to the trains being a bit rubbish?
Well, there is that as well. It becomes priced in almost. People are just like, well, a strike, it's not an unusual occurrence. They say, oh, well, strike again, shrug your shoulders, I'll just find alternative. And then you're less likely, once it does end, to go back to the rail, because in your head you're thinking it's unreliable. Yeah.
Well, we've had a viewer in saying almost exactly that. This is from Lee. Good morning to you, Lee, who says, I have to say, over the last year, I've now completely given up on travelling by train. They're too reliable and they are too run down. So this is where the unions could be biting their nose off to spite their face.
And I think across the public services, though, the other day I cycled past one of the big hospitals in London, and I thought, are we on strike today? Are they on strike today? There was a load of ambulances backed up. It's almost as though these big strikes, which used to be big news, are just not such a big deal anymore, because we're slightly getting used to them. Not that they are in any way acceptable, not that it's a way to run a country, absolutely not.
It's ironic, isn't it?
It's not necessarily the headline, is it?
Yeah, but they're trying to get us out of our cars. They're trying to tax us out of our cars, buy an electric vehicle. Yesterday we covered the fact that there's a huge drop in demand for them because they're now pricey. And yet here we are. We can't rely on the train. So a lot of people like today are packing onto the roads. They're having to use the roads. And no doubt they'll fall foul of City Cars ULEZ.
Well, I was going to say, it's as ridiculous as the congestion charge, which, rather than keeping cities moving, basically sends people round and around and around and around in all sorts of funny, in the low traffic neighbourhoods and all of that.
Yep, OK. Shall we move on to one of
yours? Some good news.
Test promises faster cancer diagnosis. Hurrah for that.
Yeah, really good news on the front of the Times. This is a new blood test which can diagnose, a really simple blood test, can diagnose around 50 different types of cancer, which they're saying, scientists are saying, could save thousands of lives. It's a big British trial which was run at Oxford University of 5,500 people. And in 2/3 of the simple blood samples that were taken, the test gave a correct diagnosis. It's a more accurate test in older people, and obviously it's more accurate in more advanced cancers. What it does is it finds little fragments of tumour DNA circulating around the bloodstream. It picks them up, and it can also tell you where that's come from in the body. And it's also, the great thing about this test, it seems to be also alerting, sort of sending out cancer signals and alerting doctors to other sites in the body where there might be cancers lurking. So it is really, really good news. This is a huge oncology conference, the biggest American oncology conference that's happening in Chicago at the moment, ASCO, and lots of good news coming out of that. And with people living longer, more and more and more people are going to be encountering cancer in their 70s and 80s.
A record backlogs, of course, for a diagnosis on the NHS.
Yeah, well, terrible backlogs, months when people just simply were not being tested or diagnosed. So this kind of thing, hopefully it's cheap, hopefully it's as simple as it sounds.
Yeah,
right.
Fingers crossed. Kevin, we'll finish with this story, shall we? It's a story in the Express. At last, banks putting up saving rates.
Yeah, well, this is a campaign that the Express have had. Now, as we know, interest rates have been going up now month upon month for quite some time. Now, the banks have been very quick to slap the interest rate rise on mortgages, and people are seeing that in their monthly bills, but they've been criticised for being too slow to put on savings accounts as well. But it looks as though finally they're starting to do so. So it's good news for savers. Obviously, interest rate rises are generally seen as a bad thing because, as I say, it adds hundreds of pounds a month to people's mortgage bills. However, if you are a pensioner, for instance, and you have to rely on your savings income, this is a good thing. And there's one actually account which has an unbelievable interest rate of 9%, which is the highest headline rate available since 2011. So, I actually did notice, I've not got much savings at all, but I did notice yesterday, I did see, I was like, my goodness, interest. I've never had interest in such a long time, and actually I've got some interest. But yeah, so as I say, that's the sort of flip side to the generally bad news of interest rate rises.
I mean, the question is, what's taken so long?
Well, clearly putting it on savings costs the banks money, whereas putting it on mortgages earns them money. So you can understand from their point of view why they're more quick to do one than the other.
Pockets and slow to give it back. 'Twas evident.
Yeah.
Well, Emma, Kevin, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid, but thank you very much. You're going to be back in the next hour.